Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I don't know about the delay and how quickly everyone will see kind of everything, but welcome. Thanks for being here for our first AKS community meeting. Been talking about this a little bit on Twitter. We considered this a soft launch, so if you're here, great. You learned about it. You learned about it early. If not, we're gonna have this recording available, and we're gonna share this out there and do a whole bunch of these in the future. So let me go ahead and get into uh, what we're here to talk about. So first, who am I? I'm going to be your host for these every time, or at least most of these. I'm a product manager on our AKS and cloud native platforms team. I've been at Microsoft seemingly forever, 22 years now. I'm actually only recently new working on the AKS team, at least directly. I've been working with AKS since the early days, since before it was even called AKS. And so I'm very excited to be a part of the team now, helping us build our Kubernetes-based and cloud-native solutions in Azure. And so I'm based out of Denver, Colorado. For those across the globe, if you're not familiar with the area, you can see some of the pictures there, but it's just a mountainous, beautiful area that you can do things outside. And that's usually what I'm doing when I'm not sitting in this little office here talking about Kubernetes. So I will be your host for these. What is our agenda for today? First, I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about what this is, particularly since it's the first time. What is the community? What is it not? What are we here to do? I'll do some brief recent announcements. There'll always be announcements in this community meeting, at least the monthly sessions we do. So I'll go through a little bit of that, but I won't spend a ton of time because we actually have two special guests, two special topics for today. Our Upstream team will come on and talk about some of the work that we do in open source and the open source ecosystem. And then we'll talk a little bit about our upcoming LTS release, or maybe it's essentially here now. But we'll have one of my colleagues, Justin Davies, come on and talk about what we're doing with this LTS release. And then we'll wrap things up. So again, thanks for everyone for being here. What is the AKS community? Basically, this is a place where our customers can connect with the AKS product team and really all of the teams that help support AKS and Cloud Native on Azure. You might have seen similar iterations of this in the past. A lot of folks that have been working with AKS for a while worked with our office hours. We had these public office hours we held. They were kind of Teams meetings. And I think a lot of folks like that, and we're sad to see it go. And so the use of YouTube here, I think, is really to kind of make this more broadly available. It is meant to be a two-way kind of conversation, and so that may be a little bit more challenging in a YouTube live kind of scenario. You know, in a Teams type of meeting, you can just come off of mute and ask your questions and things like that. So it's a little bit more difficult in something like this. But I think my goal here is to have questions come by in the chat, make them available to the speakers, and do things like that. And we'll get better at this as we go, still kind of learning the technology and how things work. But at a minimum, there'll be monthly community meetings like this, where we come on and talk about recent updates, bring in special topics and speakers. But there'll be other kinds of meetings as well. We may do recorded video updates, real short kind of sessions to help you know what's going on and what we're working on. I also want to do kind of ask me anything sessions and bring in maybe popular kind of speakers that are a part of the ecosystem. Get some questions ahead of time, take questions in the live stream, and just get that opportunity to kind of ask some questions of folks that help make this kind of platform possible. And so again, somewhat of a new thing. This isn't the place where you learn about everything. There's a ton of communication channels that you get announcements about the product and so forth. So this Twitter account will be about community meetings and not necessarily about the product announcements and so forth. And so how do you stay connected? Subscribe to the YouTube channel. I think in YouTube, you're supposed to say things like subscribe and like or something like that. But if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll certainly know about all of the content. The live meetings will be, recordings will be there, and there'll be recordings there as well. And follow along on things like Twitter. If Threads is available where you are, I'll put the announcements there as well. And any kind of slides or other kinds of document type things. At the moment, I'm going to put those out on this GitHub repo, and so that you can at least keep in touch and find out what's going on in that area as well. We do have a code of conduct. This is really important to me. We tried to kind of mirror Microsoft's mission and focus that really every person, every organization can be a part of this. And so really a no tolerance policy around any kind of things that could go wrong around just harassment and bullying and things like that. But I always think of my kids, and I used to tell my kids when they were younger, just be good to other people. Sometimes it's actually harder than it seems. I think there's obviously a lot of different cultures and things that are a part of this, and sometimes it's not always obvious how different parts of the world work. So let us know if we're failing at anything here. Reach out through any of the communication channels and let us know. If I fail anywhere, it's the best way for me to learn about the right kind of ways to do things. So take a look at the code of conduct. Please follow it. Please be good to others. And thank you for that. So let's talk about recent announcements. So again, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll put all the links. These are all links. I'll put them all in the description of the video. Any of the links that you've seen on some of the slides, I'll put them all there. But I did want to point out some things that were recently announced. Obviously, we had some events over the last, say, 6 months where things were announced like KubeCon in Europe and our Build conference. And so a lot of these you've probably already heard about if you're in touch with AKS. The one that was most recently announced that I'm a big fan of is the Network Observability add-on. I think if you've worked with Kubernetes for a while, sometimes it can be hard to figure out what's going on. We all love to blame the network. We assume it's the network that broke. If it's not the network, it's DNS or vice versa. But it would be good to actually have tooling to allow you to go in and actually see what's going on. And a lot of customers bring in third-party tooling to do this kind of thing. But I think it's super helpful to have kind of dashboards and ability to observe and diagnose what's going on. And so take a look at the Network Observability add-on. It's easy just to add it to your cluster and let us know what you find. Let us know feedback that you're seeing because we'd love to hear it. The other one is the Linux container host. You might have heard about something called Mariner over the last year or so. It's been renamed essentially the Azure Linux, and there's an Azure Linux container host that you can choose as an option for your operating system for your node pools. So some customers are looking for a bit more of a streamlined process that's entirely run by Microsoft. And so using Azure Linux as your node pool option allows you to make sure that you're getting those perhaps quicker. And so a lot of customers are trying this out. I definitely encourage you to try it out and let us know. It is GA at some point in the last couple months. And Kubernetes Apps is essentially our marketplace for third-party solutions on the platform. And so you can actually go out and take a look at some supported solutions on the platform, third-party solutions that can be easily installed into the cluster via the marketplace. And so that went GA in the last couple months as well. We'd love feedback on what's in there, like maybe what's not in there. Are we missing anything? That's the kind of stuff we'd love to hear about. So again, I'm not going to go through the rest of these. I really want to focus on our special guest today. But take a look at some of these, and again, we'll always be sharing kind of recent announcements in these meetings as we go. So with that, we are on to our first special topic. And again, I'm going to pull in the folks from our Upstream team that work on our open source ecosystem. So I'm going to bring them on screen here. When I kick it off over to them, I'm going to pop off of screen, take a look at the chat. I see all kinds of fun stuff happening in the chat. So let me add Bridget, Laki, and Rita, some of my wonderful friends here at Microsoft. And I'll let you folks introduce yourself. And yeah, thanks for being here. Really appreciate your help on the first one of these.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. It is really exciting to be here. I think we have a few slides to show you and some stuff to go over, but maybe it would make the most sense for people to just introduce themselves while I get the slides up, starting with Rita.
Hey everyone, my name is Rita. In case we haven't met, I work at Microsoft and I am the dev lead for the container upstream team. Nice meeting y'all.
Hi everybody. I'm Lachlan Evenson. I'm a product manager on the Cloud Native Ecosystem team. Really excited to be joining you all. Thanks for joining for this inaugural session of the AKS Community Meeting. We've got lots of goodies to show you. So very excited to be here. I'll be in the chat as well, but thanks for joining. I'll pass it over to Bridget.
Awesome. And I am on Lahi's team of PMs focused on upstream open source at Azure. And I'm really excited, actually, to talk about some of these projects. Let's see. I think I just want to get some slides up. Fantastic. By the way, I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is not a picture of Minneapolis this week because everything is very, very hot. But it is a real picture that I did take. And we're going to be going through some of the upstream open source, not absolutely everything, because there is way too much everything. But we'll go through some. And we'll probably start with, I'll kick it over to Lockie and have him talk about what is our overall mission.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. Totally biased. I think we have the best job at Microsoft and Azure. We get to work in cloud native ecosystems and upstream. So what we're really trying to do is work on tooling and problem areas in the cloud native ecosystem. And the way we do that is working in open source communities. For example, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the Open Containers Initiative, and many others. But you'll always find us present in those communities. We're looking for ways to meet our customers, meet the community, look at ways that we can integrate some tooling that you all are using. We want you to have a great experience with this open source tooling. And I love having the opportunity to work with folks like Bridget and Rita in these communities to bring the best of open source to Azure and to the community. So really excited to be here and talk about what we're working on. But as you can see here, that we're not only doing things externally, we're trying to teach Microsoft how to be better at open source as well. So we get to turn that around, work internally, and it's been so exciting over the years. Teams like Xbox saying, hey, we want to do open source as well, and other teams are leveraging all this goodness in open source tooling. So as I said, totally biased. I think we have the best job at Microsoft, but it's great to be able to meet so many friendly faces in the community and work using this cloud native open source tooling. So I think our team has an enormous charter, plenty of tools in this space, plenty of problems to be solved. But as working in it for the last 7 or 8 years, I've seen such maturity in many of these projects. And, many different companies and contributions, individual contributions have made this really successful. So really love what we're doing. And we're going to go through some of the examples of some projects that we're working on that up in these open source communities. So I'll turn it back over to Bridget to pass it along. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so that GitHub does have links to a lot of different projects. We can't go into all of them today, but we are going to highlight some of what we're doing. I'll start by asking Rita to talk a little bit about our work in making Kubernetes and CNCF themselves work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to echo what Lockie was saying. I always kind of joke about this, but I'm really happy that we get paid for working in open source and working with our friends from other parts of the industry. And it shows, right? This is how we make sure the software is better, right? And just to start, you may ask, like, why is Microsoft involved in all these working groups and CNCF communities? Well, simply put, we know our customers use many clouds, and we want to meet the customers where they're at, right? And so in order to do that, we have to be in the community. When we interface, when we find bugs, when we want to work on enhancements, chances are we want to bring that to the community so that it could be used across the industry. And at the end of the day, our customers win, right? So as you can see, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but we have contributors and maintainers in various Kubernetes SIGs, special interest groups. And by being part of these communities, this is how we're able to bring back the bug fixes and the enhancements that we want for our users, again, across the industry, right? Similarly, you might ask, why is Microsoft in, say, SIG release, right? Well, one is we believe we want to show up and chop wood, carry water, right? But also this is how we make sure our product at Microsoft stays current, right? This is why we're part of the security response committee, right? We are here to help triage security bugs and CVEs for Kubernetes. And by ensuring the Kubernetes is secure, we can make sure that the product and services we ship to customers are of the best quality, right? This is why we're involved from day one, and this is how we make sure our Kubernetes is secure across the industry, right? Anything else anybody wants to add to the CNC? Oh, and again, I just want to add that we also have a lot of people involved in the leadership position in CNCF, in different tags, code of conduct. Again, we believe in order to bring the best software, we need to have a healthy community, and this is why we show up.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I'll just add that as Lockie was mentioning, we from the Upstream org are helping make sure that other people throughout Azure are represented in some of these things that are appropriate to them. So not every single person that you can imagine, person or people who are represented by all of these groups, they don't all work in Lockie's org or Rita's org. Like they work across Microsoft, and we help them, up-level their contributions.
Oh, and just one more thing to add is I know we're going to talk about LTS later, and so we're really excited that we kicked off revive the LTS working group, working with other leaders in the community, and we're seeing a lot of interest across different companies who are basically trying to ship LTS for their customers, right? And in order to do that consistently across the industry, we believe the right thing to do is in the community to make sure when we ship LTS, it is based on the community LTS, right? Yeah. And as you can see, as part of that work, all the SIGs are involved. And this is why, again, we make sure we have Microsoft people across these SIGs too, so that we're well represented.
And Rita is being too humble. She says we, but I was there. I saw a room full of people from all the clouds, all the, vendors who are working in this space, trying to bring LTS to their customers. And Rita galvanizing the room and saying, we're going to do LTS. Who's with me? And everybody saying, us. We're there too. That was, this spring in Amsterdam. So it's a lot of really great leadership coming out of this org to get the whole industry moving forward together.
And maybe just a call to action is if you are interested in LTS and you have an opinion, and I'm sure you do, this is also a great place to get involved in the community. And, to be involved in the community, it's not always just code, right? It's show up and give us feedback. This is how we can make it better for the end users.
Absolutely. Okay. Very good. And also, as you did mention, some of the work we're doing in enhancements. Do you want to take us through some of your favorite enhancements and what's going on with those?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to bore y'all. There's a ton of enhancements that we bring to Kubernetes, but I do want to highlight 4 just for now because they're more recent. 2 have already been shipped and part of AKS. You can use it today, and the other 2 are still being worked on as we speak, and we hope to ship that as part of 129. 128 is currently going through the code freeze process, and so again, I just want to call these out in case you're curious what the team is working on and how we're trying to improve the overall security and feature sets of Kubernetes. Right. So I'm just going to really quick go through some of them that I think you might ask, why is this relevant to me? So the first one is KMS encryption at rest. Again, in case you haven't heard of it, we all want to make sure our clusters are secure. And of course, the one way to increase security posture of your Kubernetes clusters is by ensuring the content in your SCD is actually encrypted. And one way to do that is making sure it's encrypted with a key that is stored in your enterprise-grade key management system, like Azure Key Vault, right? And so this is one of the enhancements we worked on to improve performance, key rotation, health check, observability, all the things that you expect from a production grade encryption solution, right? And so this is again currently beta. We started in 125, now it's in 127 on AKS. So go check it out. And the next two, both, one is for authorization, one is for authentication. In case you didn't know this, today all of the configurations are pretty much passed through the Kubernetes API server feature flag, like so CLI flags. That's great, it's okay, but obviously we want to enhance that experience, right? So with both of these enhancements, we're now converting the CLI flags to structured configurations. So what that brings is now you, the customer, could define multiple authorization webhooks and multiple OIDC providers. Again, enhance the authentication and authorization experience, right? And with that, you can define webhook level or a provider level, failure policies, and you can also define for a subset of my requests, here are the requests that should hit these webhooks, right? So again, brings much more granularity. Again, this is something, this is all coming from SIG-Auth. This is something we recognize has been a gap in the product for a long time, and this is why we're tackling that. The last one, again, why are we working on Windows privileged containers? Well, this is how we can create consistent deployment and development experience for privileged containers on Kubernetes, right? So in the past, this was only possible with Linux containers. Now, Windows also has privileged containers and hosts networking mode available, stable in 126. So you can use it today and have a consistent way of deploying privileged processes across your Windows and Linux platforms. All right.
Which is really important. And we should probably also point out that you mentioned here that, of course, Kubernetes, well, the product tie-in is AKS. It is the managed Kubernetes service, but there is some nuance around how things get built and released and what's available where. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that? Because I saw you put a couple of interesting notes here.
As I alluded to earlier, right, we have folks in SRC, we have folks in SIG release. This is how we make sure this container artifacts that you get in AKS or other parts of Microsoft products that use these container artifacts are up to date and have reduced security vulnerabilities, right? So by making sure where we have the knowledge from day one or day zero, this is how we make sure any product at Microsoft that uses these container artifacts are of good quality, right? And many products use them, not just AKS, right?
Yeah, and that's really huge. And so that's Kubernetes in general, but there are a few things about Kubernetes that we're going to kind of quickly highlight now just to talk about things that, say, Rita's team works on. And one I want to point out is SIG Cluster Lifecycle is the SIG that governs the Cluster API project. And Cluster API is if you would like to manage your Kubernetes clusters with YAML, like Kubernetes itself. And the nice thing for our customers, because we talked earlier about how customers sometimes use plenty of different clouds, public, private, whatever. And our customers can use a more consistent way to approach their cloud management by using Cluster API across all of their providers of choice. And one other thing that's kind of a little nuanced but interesting is they can actually manage their AKS clusters with Cluster API Azure provider as well. So that's kind of people don't necessarily know that's available to them, but it does exist. And it's Cluster API in general, not just the Cluster API provider for Azure, of course, but Cluster API in general is collaborated across the industry by all of the major players that you would expect. We're all working on it together. And yes, absolutely. From the chat, the logo is adorable turtles all the way down, which is great. And another thing that we did talk about recently, and I wanted to highlight, and maybe Rita has some opinions in as well, but this is the we work in Azure to make sure we collaborate wherever possible when governed by, say, Upstream, CNCF, and other open governance initiatives. And it's really exciting that we're able to collaborate now on Istio because it's a CNCF project, and it actually recently graduated. And so it's really, I think it's one of those places where, and if you saw the open service mesh idea, same engineers, same expertise, they are all up leveling as Istio maintainers now. It's quite exciting, but we also have a product tie-in in public preview for people who want the managed service. I don't know if you want to add anything, Laki or Rita, to that, but just wanted to highlight that's some good collaboration across the industry there.
Maybe just people who are very passionate about different offerings that Istio has. The team of developers who are contributing to Istio are currently working on the ambient enhancement. So the community is very, very excited about that. And we're also very excited because we want to eventually bring that into AKS.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very exciting. Okay, and then of course, other than service mesh, we also have a great deal of access and identity work around this is again tying in the Kubernetes primitives and making it possible to tie with what your industry standard EAD might already be using. Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about this one a little bit. I'm looking over to Laki to see if he wants to talk about, workload identity at all.
Yeah, sure. I think the problem space is, hey, I have this identity provider that I've been using in my organization for a long time, and now I have Kubernetes. And am I going to have two systems to manage identity, or can I bring them together? So this is one area that we always look to. Is there a way that we can present things like Azure Active Directory in a cloud native way to Kubernetes so that users can utilize one identity management system under the hood? So, we work to build this in open source. You can pick it up today. It's available on GitHub and you can install it, but it's basically, you can manage your identities in Kubernetes and have them connected to Active Directory identities. Now, you might be thinking, why is this useful to me? So if you have other services on Azure that you might want to connect to, you can use those identities rather than passing around Kubernetes secrets with connection strings and usernames and passwords and all that management. And you can move that to an identity-based system. So this is a very lightweight tool that you can pick up, install today off GitHub. And if you want a managed solution, actually, it's a product integration as well. You can turn that on today and have it fully supported and managed. So I think that's the best of both worlds there, something you can pick up and use, and also tying those two identity systems. So that was really the premise of it. And you'll see that time and time again. How do we make the operational burden of all these open source tools much simpler by integrating tools you already have in your ecosystem or in your organization? So this is just one way that we've done this. So back to you, Bridget.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to point out too that you may have seen AAD pod identity in the past, and you may think, well, wait, why did it change? And again, this is all on GitHub. You can go look at it all, but it's probably valuable to look at the difference and see the improvements being made. And this is work that we're doing out in the open with engineers from Rita's work. And then another one that we might want to talk about a little bit is Gatekeeper. And I feel like Rita often has a lot of insights here, just because I think I've seen you give the update at KubeCon a couple of times about the work happening here. What's, in your estimation, what should people be paying attention to Gatekeeper for?
Definitely follow the release notes. I guess that's one way, because there's a lot of enhancements every single release. But the one thing we are quite focused, well, there are a few features I think people are really excited about. One is external data, which allows you to define policies that actually gets data from an external data source. So example would be, verify the image signature before an image can be deployed to your cluster, for example. Another one is, in case y'all didn't know, there is a Gator CLI, which you could actually use to validate deployments in your CI/CD pipeline, thereby shifting left with the responsibilities so that it's not just enforced at the edge, right? a lot of exciting things. And another one that we're working on very hard is, if you are aware of a cell enhancement in Kubernetes, which is called Common Expression Language. In Kubernetes, this is where we want to bridge the gap between what is in Kubernetes core and what is in Gatekeeper, and bring a single user experience to users.
Nice. So there's a lot going on in Gatekeeper, which is really cool. And I want to take a quick step back and look at Lockie and say, hey, I think this is a good example around this policy space of where the intersection between Microsoft just works on this thing versus, hey, this is something out in the open source community is, because you were here at the dawn of this particular project. Can you want to give us a quick look at how that happened?
Yeah, be happy to. So we saw, and we were hearing from the community and customers, hey, my resources are growing on these clusters. How do I get them under control, and how do I manage them over time? So I want to have a way to define how they should look, and basically say, are they in or out of compliance? Are the resources on my Kubernetes cluster in and out of compliance? So when we thought about this, we actually built an internal tool called the Kubernetes Policy Manager. And we thought, why would this be, a Microsoft only solution? Could the whole community benefit for this? So we actually went and spoke to other providers in the ecosystem and said, are you seeing the same problem? They all said yes, we'd love to work on something together. So we're able to bring it to the Gatekeeper and bring it to the OPA community, and actually say, how about we utilize a policy engine that's already out there in the CNCF, build on top of that and make it kind of Kubernetes native, and actually build a policy library that folks can just pick up in open source and start to move around. So that was kind of the premise, and it's grown into and taken a life of its own. We started with some simple policies that folks were asking for most commonly, but even now in this supply chain security and folks looking at, hey, what is my software comprised of? How do I make a compliance and policy about that? It's really taken a life to see how we can solve those problems with supply chain security in the container native ecosystem as well. So it's been great to see it start from that heritage, continue to build. Again, it's something you can pick up on GitHub today and install on any Kubernetes cluster, and it'll work. Or you can come, if you're on AKS, you can just integrate it into Azure policy natively. So back to you, Bridget.
Awesome. And I love that you teed up the very next slide. And I struggled about exactly which projects to highlight for supply chain security, because we actually have a lot of them. But I figured this one is a good one to look at because it just joined CNCF as a sandbox project. It has a good product tie-in. And I would say, if you think about it this way, when you have your Kubernetes clusters and the nodes are coming and going, and maybe things are getting upgraded, but maybe there's vulnerabilities out there somewhere. If the vulnerabilities are out there somewhere, do you know? How do you clean them up? Do you have to get rid of everything and start over constantly? That is not possible. You can't reload the data. You can't take the downtime. And so having the ability to just make sure your nodes don't have any outdated images that they might accidentally launch and be at risk and put you at risk, this is important. So having a particular open source project that focuses on exactly that is just one component of a lot of the supply chain security work that we're doing that gives an open source project, and that URL will change very soon because it's actually moving out into its own org as a CNCF project. And anything else we want to add about Eraser in general?
I think you covered the most of it. I think supply chain security, if it's of interest to folks on this call, I think it would require a whole session. So I think you've covered Eraser, but there are multiple investments. I think the supply chain security ecosystem and space and problem space is rather broad. So there are different pillars in there. So I think if it's of interest, let us know in the chat, and we'll come back and give you a deep dive on tying some different solutions out there in the ecosystem together. Thanks, Bridget.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So possible future episode. Request it in the comments. So that is the whirlwind overview of all of the open source stuff, except there's of course tons more, but some of the open source stuff that our team is working on. And I think probably the call to action there is, hey, this is something we can work on with you. And we would really like to work on it with you. And I will just look to Rita and then to Lockie and I will say, please come look at the Kubernetes release project process in general, because every 4 months, Kubernetes is looking for more people to be release shadows, more people to join the process and help get Kubernetes out there. So that would be my call to action. Rita, what do you think people should jump in if they want to get started with open source at all?
I think you had one slide earlier that had a list of the projects and areas that we're involved with. So a lot of them have issues, and many of them have good first issues if you really want to get involved and just hang out with us, right? And then we have community calls. If you want to come and talk to the maintainers or give us feedback, that's also another really great way. And many of our projects also have Slack channels as well as Zoom community calls. So many places to get involved.
Wonderful. And finally, Lockie, what's your call to action?
Yeah, I think we've given you a sampler of just some areas our team are focusing on. I think, feel free to reach out to any and all of us on the team. If you're interested in any areas that we've shown you, happy to answer any questions. But if there's areas we're missing that you think that, are blatantly obvious in the work that you're doing, you're in the trenches working on these things and seeing these issues or challenges or gaps, really interested to hear what you're seeing as well. And then I just think finally, if there's anything else you'd love to have us back and talk about, just let us know in the chat. I mean, there's so many different areas we can drill into, and we could run a whole, many of these sessions. But I think just hearing from what you're interested in most will help direct us and provide you the best kind of content to bring. But thanks for having us. Really, really happy to be here. And I'll flick it back to Brian. Thanks, Bridget. Thanks, Rita.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Yep, great to have you here and talk about this. This is some of my favorite things that we do at Microsoft. Is we've been involved in the open source communities for quite some time, but in this space, I think Rita had said it. We try to meet customers where they are. We have a lot of really cool things that we do in Azure, but the more that we're using kind of these open source solutions that customers are used to using in all kinds of other clouds and other platforms and other places, I know means a lot to customers. And this is nice to see all the work that we do. Obviously, we're here to talk a lot about what we do in our products, but hopefully you get an idea how much work it takes actually out in the open source community and how important that work is. So thanks to all three of you for being here. I appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and switch over to our next topic. Let's make sure I'm using my technology right. And we are going to talk about AKS LTS. Obviously, this was mentioned in the previous talk about Upstream, but we have some exciting news to talk about LTS. We announced this at KubeCon, and I have Justin Davies, a product manager, also on the same team as myself. Justin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah. So Justin Davis, I'm a product manager on the AKS team. I kind of look after data operations. So what do you do with Kubernetes once you've actually spun the cluster up? So how do you scale it? How do you maintain it? How do you manage it as well? As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm British, but I now live in Redmond. So moved over about a year ago. I know a couple of people in the chat as well. So hello, everyone. Nice to see you. So long-term support is it's a challenging subject, let's put it like that. So we hear from customers probably on a weekly basis in terms of concerns about wanting to be able to upgrade their Kubernetes versions, their minor versions, so 124, 25, 26. One of the challenges that we have, and kind of also echoing back to the open source team as well, is that we are intertwined with the open source community when it comes to Kubernetes. And we follow the practices from the Upstream Kubernetes community. So when the community releases a version of a minor version of Kubernetes, it's supported by the community. If there's a CVE, if there's a bug fix which needs to be there, the community will fix that. And that also includes our team, who is part of that open source community, to be able to fix those issues. And that cycle kind of happens over kind of roughly 3 times a year that you get a minor version coming out. And the way that we support those Kubernetes version on AKS is that we support 3 at a time. So Kubernetes 126, 25, and 24 are the currently supported versions of Kubernetes. As 127 comes out from the community, we will then take that from Upstream, and it's purely Upstream in terms of what we take and deploy for AKS. And we will deploy that on and make it available for you to be able to use. what happens when 127 is generally available is that then 124 will drop off and will no longer be supported by AKS. We do have this thing called platform support, which is that you'll keep running your Kubernetes 124 cluster, but you won't be able to create new node pools. You'll be able to scale those node pools, for example, and we will give you the support for the underlying infrastructure. So your virtual machine SLAs, your SLA or service level agreement on the control plane, and any support that you have with regards to the control plane, we will look after you when it comes to that. But you'll kind of have to be on your own with Kubernetes 124. And that poses a challenge to customers, whether you're small, whether you're an enterprise customer as well. The real challenge is that, okay, so I have workloads running on Kubernetes, but I'm doing work to be able to move those workloads over to AKS and to Kubernetes and run them. But I also have to have in the back of my head that I have to think about, I have to upgrade that Kubernetes version to be able to follow the community as the almost sliding window kind of goes through. And that poses a challenge to customers. It's Kubernetes is there to be able to take away a lot of the operational overhead, but just the velocity of how quickly those Kubernetes releases come out means that customers are always trying to play catch up. And we've discussed this, I think, for years within the AKS team in terms of how do we fix this for customers?
I mean,
sorry, go on.
I would say that velocity, I think, is the part that's super intimidating for customers. Like I feel like there's two kinds of customers. There's the ones that like upgrading is no problem and they don't understand that this is necessary. There's even the ones that they don't even know that they needed to upgrade, and they show up in 1.23 or something, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble."
Yeah.
And I assume that you're just constantly hearing those kinds of stories, and we want it to work for those customers as well.
Yeah, we do, absolutely. And I honestly, just for me personally, how many emails I get sent on a weekly basis from customers saying this is a challenge for me. And all of the other PMs on the team as well, who are looking after customers directly, will also get those types of emails. And the real challenges that customers have, an ops team's job should be there more of a site reliability engineer, making sure that the lights are on, not having to spend half of their time thinking, how are we going to upgrade these clusters? And I do actually want to take a step back. We've had conversations like this before, Brian. It's just like, 12-factor application development. They should be able to deal with failure. They should be able to deal with a node going down and moving over to another node. That's bread and butter when it comes to Kubernetes. And we have facilities to be able to say, if you want us to automatically upgrade your cluster for you when a new minor version comes out, you can do that. But your application has to be aware of the fact that it's going to have its infrastructure taken away and moved over to another node. And whilst 12-factor has been around for a very long time, it still makes customers nervous. Like, okay, you can upgrade that, but what if something goes wrong? And the customer still has to think about that. There's still kind of cognitive weight there that the customers have to deal with in terms of how do they help make that migration. Sorry, I haven't had enough coffee this morning. So what do? How do we fix this for customers? And this is really where it came of the intersection between the product team that I work on, as well as our upstream team who you just talked about, as well as working with the upstream community. And so we took the decision really to try and figure out how do we make that easier for customers. And we came up with long-term support. And the idea of long-term support is that we, as in the AKS team, will pick a specific Kubernetes version. And in that case, it's Kubernetes 127. And we will bless that as being LTS capable. What that means is that you will get that 1 year of support, as you would do with any minor release on AKS. But as soon as the community support drops off, Microsoft is going to take responsibility. Currently, Microsoft is basically saying we will backport CVEs and significant bug fixes into that 127 version. And so we will patch and update that as well. And that's one side of it. It's like for us to be able to just get out of the gate and support these customers, to be able to say, you know what, we will support you for a period of 2 years. That's what we have to do. We have to put a stake in the ground. But we can't do that without the community. And then that's what, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I mean, in order to do that, I assume there's some kind of fork, and people hear fork and they start to kind of go into a panic. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So what we've done, and with the Kubernetes LTS working group is that we've created a new repository, which is basically where any changes that we make and any CVEs that we backport are in the open. Like it's going to be upstream, it's going to be available, and so they will be in the open. And then you'll be able to see what we do, how we do it, what the pull requests are, when they're going to be rolled back into the AKS 127 release. So all of that is in the open. That's like for us, that's a non-negotiable. We don't want to fork this and say, this is Microsoft's fork. It's like, no, we're forking this and we're going to do the work on it. And we want the community to come with us and support us in that and figure out some of the really challenging problems. Like, what do you backport? What is considered something that has to be backported from the main branch? So the domain itself. So those are the processes that Lackey's team and Rita's team are really focusing on in terms of what does that look like in the community. So for us, it has to start being open. We can't just say, here's our private repository, and we'll do something later on or release those patches. It has to be in the open because that's what Kubernetes is. And we're really, really strict in terms of us doing that within the AKS team. So yeah, so let's hypothetical. Sorry, go on.
So I guess the other thing that comes up is obviously there's security hot fixes and things like that get pulled into it, and that seems fairly obvious what gets pulled in. But what if I'm using third-party solutions? I'm pulling in Helm charts. You know where I'm going with this. So, how will we approach that? And if we haven't figured it all out yet, that's fine too, because I think we're hoping to get feedback.
So we're obviously Kubernetes core itself, that's one thing, Kubernetes 127, right? So fixing those issues and making sure that the Kubernetes stack itself is maintained and well maintained is one aspect of it. And I don't want to say, and I'll probably get a kick from the Upstream team, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier than having to deal with the ecosystem of add-ons, for example. Now, there are a number of add-ons that you can have, or kind of Helm charts that we basically support within AKS. So CADA is an example, where it's an add-on, and therefore Microsoft will maintain that moving forward. We're going through the iteration at the moment in terms of what add-ons can legitimately be supported for a 2-year period, bearing in mind that there are some add-ons which you can just bump the version. So CADA goes from one version to another, and that new version will still work on Kubernetes 127. That's great. That's kind of, we just follow that and we bump up the version of CADA. There are other add-ons which are going to be a bit more challenging because the community support around that may be a much smaller window, and it may be that add-on is pinned to specific Kubernetes versions. And so, yeah, it's not going to be easy, but we are absolutely committed to be able to go through that and figure out what we can support and where. That's for the AKS add-ons. That's the stuff that we basically maintain and support for you every day. For things which you bring to the AKS cluster, so Helm charts, open source, kind of projects that you're using, we can't really, I'm going to be completely honest, we can't maintain all of those. It's like you would need to have triple, quadruple the size of the team to be able to take that on. And even then, how do you deal with all of those? And so we have to draw a line somewhere. And I call it a give-get situation. The get that you get as a customer is that you have a version of Kubernetes that is supported for 2 years. There are going to be some things that we can't support past that 1-year period because it's just technically not feasible. And we're working through those at the moment now to be able to define what those are. And literally going to be I'm being completely honest again in terms of what our process is. We're going to start documenting what those are as well. I'm hoping to keep it minimal in terms of what you can't do, but I think there will be some challenges in terms of what can we do to be able to scale and support both the add-ons that we have in AKS and also guidance that we give to customer in terms of how things are supported that you bring into the AKS cluster.
Yeah, it seems fair because again I might be biased, but there's trade-offs. You're going to this LTS release because it's hard to keep up with everything, but perhaps maybe they're not using some of those advanced things or some third-party tools.
Yeah,
and they trade off the idea that I can't necessarily grab every new cool thing and put it into my cluster because I'm making the choice for the other benefits. It seems fair to me. I'm always amazed how, no matter how far behind you think companies can be, even in the Windows world. I think back to like Windows Server. We would support Windows Server releases for, it felt like a decade, but you'd go in and say, okay, we need to help you get off of Windows 2008 R2, and then you'd find they had a whole bunch of Windows 2000 and T4, and they were in a state where they didn't have all of the cool new things, but they functioned, and that's sometimes the trade-off.
Yeah, and exactly, but again, just to kind of demonstrate that, we do have on the Windows side the ability to be able to have much longer support for those enterprise customers. But it's not magic. It doesn't just happen. There is a team of people in Microsoft who are maintaining that code because customers need to be able to run those older versions of the operating system, which aren't currently generally supported. The situation is exactly the same. Somebody still has to maintain that and think about the ecosystem. And it's taken us a while to get to this point, because it's saying, yeah, we'll support it 127 for 2 years is one thing, but the fine details of that is another. And there's so many people across Microsoft that worked on getting us to this point. And I can only just say thank you, because it's going to really solve a significant problem for customers. There's 2 more things I want to talk about, Brian, and I'll be super quick because I'm conscious of time. But one is basically one is when customers come to us, one of the first things that they say is that, I'm running Kubernetes 119 on this other provider, for example, or I can still deploy this version of Kubernetes. I want customers to kind of understand this, and it's a real challenge, is that if that version of Kubernetes is not being supported by the community, then the only alternative is that it's being supported as a fork by somebody else. And the challenge is that how much maintenance and support do you have for those older versions of Kubernetes? It may be easy to be able to turn around and say, I'm just going to say on Kubernetes 119 or 120 because I can deploy it. But the challenge that you have is it completely supported top to bottom? And that's really what we're saying here from a Microsoft point of view, and really hoping that the community gets behind this, is that you get that support both from all the way from the Kubernetes components all the way down to the infrastructure and the control plane that you need to run on. So it's important that customers understand kind of the gravity, I would say, in terms of well-maintained and community-maintained software. The final piece that I want to talk about is the upgrade strategy. Now, if you take Kubernetes 127, and I usually pick Kubernetes 133 maybe as being the next LTS version, the migration from Kubernetes 127 all the way going up to Kubernetes 133, that's a lot of jumps. And so anyone that's been used to Kubernetes is fully aware of the fact that you do get API changes, you do get API deprecations or API graduations. And so whilst your pod spec annotations or your YAML definitions may reference an old version of an API in Kubernetes 127, that may be different or completely gone away or superseded by something else in Kubernetes 133. And so the migration from all of those versions is probably going to have an impact on your workloads. And so we're trying to think about how do we help customers in that journey as well. One of the things that we do that we released recently is that if you're trying to do an upgrade and we know that you're using deprecated or changed APIs, we will inform you that it's like, hey, before you do this, just to let you know, you have been using what deprecated APIs, you're going to need to fix those before upgrading. And so those types of things that customers will have to deal with is that whilst we can migrate you from Kubernetes 127 to Kubernetes 133, there's also probably going to be changes that are going to be needed within your applications to be able to make that successful. And again, the benefit that you get is 2 years of support. Great, you've got stability. You don't have to think about migrating a couple of times a year, but you also do need to start thinking about how you're going to migrate from 127 to 133 and what that looks like for your applications. We're going to do our best to try and make that as easy as possible for you. But again, being completely honest with our customers, we want them to understand that they're probably going to have to do migrations of their pod spec annotations or their YAML definitions as well during that process. As I said, we will, to the best of our ability, we will help you on that journey. We'll give you good solid documentation. We will try and put fail safes in place as well to be able to help you say, just so you know, when you do this migration, something else may happen. And we may even recommend as well, probably would recommend, at least as an operator, I would do it like this, is spinning up a brand new 133 cluster, do a blue-green deployment onto that 133 cluster, and then do a cutover, so that you basically have everything in status, everything working on the old version, migrate over, and then just do a nice clean cutover to 133 once you've done all of your YAML depth changes and away you go, basically. And the idea is that you could go from 127 to 133, turn on LTS, and then get another 2 years worth of support as well. And that's pretty amazing if you think about it. What we're talking about here is over a 4-year period, you've upgraded your Kubernetes cluster, or you've moved versions once.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I know there are customers that's something they're dying for, because there is all kinds of new things that are being added in 128, 129.
Yeah.
But they may not want those at all. A lot of customers, I'm just, deployments, pods, services, ingress, like
Exactly.
and that's great. Yeah.
Exactly. And the idea of Kubernetes, the beautiful idea of Kubernetes is that it's an abstraction away from infrastructure. It allows you to be able to run. We used to give a slide all the time, didn't we, about the benefits of Kubernetes? It was about scaling, health, failover. You get all of those with Kubernetes. And if you're using amazing whiz-bang new features, then yeah, you're going to be on the bleeding edge. Is LTS applicable to you if you always want to be on the bleeding edge? Probably not. But if what you're doing is just running workloads and you want to keep them up and running to serve an application, and you want that stability, then LTS may be an option for you to be able to do that.
Yep. Now let's try taking a question from the chat. I experiment with this. From our friend Pixel Robots, says, what about patch versions on LTS?
Yeah, so once we move out of community support, the moniker for those patch versions, they will be made available. If we have a CVE update or a CVE fix or a significant bug fix which goes in there, there will be a new naming convention for a bug fix, and they will be deployed in the same way that you do today, by a node image update, for example. So yes, what the changes that you're doing there is to apply a patch, not doing a minor release update. So you basically follow the same process that you do today, Richard.
Very cool. Another question I have for you, and again, I think this will be the last one. I think we're hitting the end of our time, but it seems like I watch internal forums where we ask questions of our product team, and it seems like there's a question every day, maybe a few times a day, where someone's like, my customer's on 1.24, they want to jump to LTS and then go to, like, how many of these questions do you get per day?
I think it's per week, probably, in all honesty. So I think I'll probably get around about 4 or 5 per week in terms of those types of questions. It's like I said, the cognitive load on our customers worrying about this, where customers shouldn't be worrying about this stuff, right? We as Kubernetes providers and maintainers really should be fixing these problems for customers, because on one hand, we're saying Kubernetes abstracts away from infrastructure and makes your life easier, but then there's all of these other challenges that customers have to think about. And it's our role within the AKS team to make that simpler, making day 2 operations simpler, so that customers think about running their applications, and their applications are what drive business value. And therefore, if you go all the way up the chain in a customer, the CEO is thinking about, this application is driving engagement or is driving revenue for us. That's what they care about. But that's what we need to get the ops team, that level of calm, where it's just like, it just runs, it's just generating revenue, or it's driving business value. That's our job, to make that as simple as possible. Kubernetes gets us, I'd say, probably 80% of the way there, and we just need to close the gap on the rest of the 20, which is exactly what our team tries to do: make life simpler, so that customers can just drive business value by running on Kubernetes and running on Azure with AKS.
Yeah, very cool. In fact, in joining the team, I guess back in May, I feel like that was the biggest thing I noticed, was that's the focus of all the work that we're doing. You've almost summarized everything. It gets more more specific than that, but if you really think about it, we're trying to make this easier while still giving people that ability to get this super powerful Kubernetes technology in their platform, but not necessarily have to go through so much to manage it. And so
Yeah.
everything, I think, from everything we've heard about, plus in the future, is focused on that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, it is. It's the complete priority of our team to be able to do that. And it's a balancing act as well. You know, the power of Kubernetes and making it pure Kubernetes from an API point of view, whilst at the same time making it as easy as possible. It's a balancing act, but that's what we're focused on.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for being here talking about LTS. I know this was a topic everyone wanted to hear about, and I appreciate having it in our first inaugural AKS community meeting. So thanks for being here. I'm going to wrap things up. I'll let you go, Justin, and get back to things. But again, thank you. And really thank you to everyone for being here. I think it's gone well. Again, I'm learning the technology, learning the flow of this, but it feels pretty comfortable. So let us know any kind of feedback. These are all the kind of ways to stay connected and get a hold of us. I certainly want to be able to get to more kind of Q&A and future kind of meetings and things like that. So we'll certainly do that. And we'll put slides and any kind of resources, not only in the GitHub repo there, but in the description for the video, we'll try to add at least some of the links that we had in slides, because I know there's a lot of links that we had on there that you probably couldn't get to. So we'll do all that kind of thing as well. But again, thanks for being here. If you're listening to the recording or if you were here for the live stream, thank you for being a part of it. And we're looking forward to doing these in the future. Thanks a lot.